Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be, diving into a true classic. It's Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence
It's
People.
a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many people have gotten so much out of this book, and we've got all our notes and highlights, all ready to go.
Yeah.
And we're here to kind of help you pull out the timeless wisdom that's made this book so impactful for, it's been around for decades.
Decades, yeah. It's amazing how relevant it still is,
Right.
even though, like you said, it's been around for so long.
Yeah.
These core ideas about understanding people, making genuine connections, and having a positive influence, those are things that they never go out of style, no matter what year it is.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Yeah.
You've highlighted some of the big promises that Carnegie makes in the book. He says it can help you achieve 8 specific things, and these range from changing your whole mindset and breaking out of ruts to boosting your influence and handling complaints smoothly. What really jumps out at you from all those promises?
You know what I find fascinating is how he links self-improvement to having better relationships.
Yeah.
He's not just giving us these surface level tips,
Right.
He's digging deeper into personal growth, like how we form new visions and ambitions.
Yeah, like the inner work.
Yeah, it's that inner work, I think, that sets us up to connect with people authentically.
Right.
And effectively.
That's such a good point. It's like he saying you can't really influence others in a positive way if you haven't really done some work on yourself first.
Exactly.
And speaking of influence, Carnegie uses some really interesting research to back up his claims. It's not like he's just making this stuff up,
Yeah.
He meticulously studied, historical figures like Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
And he even ran what he called laboratories of human interaction to test his ideas in the real world.
I mean, that really emphasizes how important it is to actually use what you learn.
Totally.
He didn't just want people to, read his book. He wanted them to live it.
Yeah.
And he gives us some really concrete strategies to make that happen, like active reading, applying the principles every day, and even making the learning process fun.
So, when we talk about real-world application, Lincoln's journey is a powerful example, right?
Oh, absolutely.
He went from this kind of hot-headed young guy who got into arguments through insults to a leader known for his tact and diplomacy.
Yeah.
So it really underscores how important self-mastery is if you want to influence people in a positive way.
It's incredibly inspiring, especially if you're in any kind of leadership position.
Yeah, for sure.
The story of how Lincoln chose not to send that angry letter to General Meade during the Civil War.
Oh, right.
He speaks volumes about his growth. I mean, imagine how different things might have been if he hadn't learned to control his impulses and prioritize understanding over blame.
That's a perfect example of how these principles can play out on a grand scale.
Right.
We're talking decisions that shaped history. But these principles are just as important in our everyday lives, in our personal and professional interactions.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that Carnegie really cautions against is the damage that constant criticism can do.
Oh, yeah.
In our relationships.
Time.
He shares all these stories of people whose lives were completely changed by genuine appreciation.
Yeah.
And he contrasts that with his throwing out empty flattery.
Right.
And shows how important sincere appreciation is for building strong, lasting relationships. The story Father Forgets that he includes in the book is such a powerful example.
It's tough.
It's a tough read.
Yeah.
But it's such a good reminder of how easy it is to slip into that habit of criticizing and how deeply it can affect those closest to us.
It's a wake-up call.
Yeah.
To focus on appreciating the people in our lives.
Yeah.
Especially our families, instead of, constantly picking them apart.
Right. And, when you think about all these examples, it really brings us back to one of the core principles of the book, this deep human need to feel important.
Oh, for sure.
Carnegie really emphasizes that, doesn't he?
He does, and that's where principles like making others feel important, truly listening to them, and speaking in terms of their interests come into play.
Yeah.
It's all about shifting our focus outward, away from ourselves, and trying to truly understand what other people want and need.
And Carnegie gives all these fascinating stories and examples of how these principles work in all these different situations, from everyday conversations to complex negotiations. It's like he's giving us a toolkit
He is.
for better human interaction.
And one of the tools he gives us is challenging that common idea of always trying to, win arguments.
Right.
He argues that most of the time, trying to prove you're right, it just leads to resentment and damaged relationships.
Instead, he says it's much more effective to, focus on empathy.
Yes.
And understanding where the other person is coming from.
That leads us to one of the most intriguing principles in the book, I think, the idea of arousing an eager want in others.
I love that.
What's so compelling about this is how Carnegie argues that focusing on what the other person desires can help both people get what they want.
Yeah.
Win-win.
He has that great story about the landlord and the rent, right?
Yes.
Instead of fighting about whether the rent increase was fair, Carnegie focused on understanding the landlord's perspective and needs, and ended up getting a much better deal.
Exactly. It's a powerful illustration of how understanding and meeting the other person's wants can lead to those mutually beneficial outcomes.
So let's talk about the flip side of criticism, which is praise and encouragement.
Okay.
Carnegie was a huge believer in the power of positive reinforcement.
Yes.
And he had some pretty amazing stories to back it up, didn't he?
Oh, he did.
He shared stories of people whose lives were completely transformed by genuine praise and encouragement.
Yeah.
He believed that focusing on people's strengths and helping them develop their potential was much more effective than dwelling on their weaknesses. He was all about recognizing and celebrating those small victories along the way, especially for people who might be struggling or lacking confidence.
Right.
He saw encouragement as a way to ignite a spark in others.
Yeah.
Motivating them to achieve things they never thought possible.
Yeah, and isn't that what we all want? To see the people around us reach their full potential.
That's a beautiful thought.
It is.
And it leads us to one of the most memorable stories in the book.
Okay.
The story of Charles Schwab, the president of Bethlehem Steel. He believed that the key to getting people to do their best work wasn't about being a technical expert.
Right.
It was about connecting with them, inspiring them, making them feel valued.
That's right. And he had a very specific way of doing that. He was known for being hearty in his approbation and lavish in his praise.
I love that.
And loath to find fault.
That's such a powerful statement.
It is.
It speaks to the importance of creating a positive and supportive environment where people feel encouraged to grow and excel.
Absolutely.
It's about recognizing that everyone has, unique talents and contributions to offer, and that our role as leaders and as friends is to help them shine.
It's like he's saying that people will naturally rise to the occasion if they feel appreciated and supported.
And that brings us to another great story.
Okay.
The one about Jim Farley, the Postmaster General, who was famous for never forgetting a name.
Wow.
He attributed his success in life to his ability to make people feel important. And part of that was remembering their names and using them.
It sounds like such a small thing.
Right.
But it can make a huge difference.
Think about how good it feels when someone remembers your name.
Oh, for sure.
It instantly makes you feel seen and valued.
Farley took this to another level. He could remember thousands of names.
Wow.
Even after brief encounters, he understood that people are naturally interested in themselves.
Yeah.
And by remembering their names, he tapped into that fundamental human need for recognition.
Yeah, and he'd even send personalized letters addressing people by their first names.
Oh, wow.
Which made a huge impact, People felt like he genuinely cared about them, and in turn, they were more receptive to his message.
It's a great reminder that even small gestures of acknowledgement can go a long way in building strong relationships.
It really drives home the point that building connections isn't just about grand gestures.
Right.
It's about those consistent, everyday actions that show people they matter. And that brings us to another important principle that Carnegie emphasizes: the power of being a good listener.
Oh, absolutely. Such a big one.
He talks about how important it is to give your exclusive attention to the person speaking to you. He even quotes Charles W. Eliot, former president of Harvard, who said, "Nothing else is so flattering."
It's so simple, yet so powerful, and so often overlooked in our busy world.
We're constantly bombarded with distractions, but taking the time to truly listen to someone shows them that we value them and their thoughts.
And Carnegie has a great story about how he won over a disgruntled customer just by listening patiently to his complaints.
Oh, right.
He didn't argue or defend himself. He just gave the customer the space to vent.
And feel heard.
And what happened? Did the customer stay angry?
The customer completely changed his tune. He went from being angry and confrontational
Wow.
to being appreciative and even apologetic.
That's amazing.
Carnegie realized that by resisting the urge to interrupt or defend himself, he had created a safe space for the customer to express his frustrations and feel understood.
That's a perfect illustration of the transformative power of simply listening.
Yeah.
It's about setting aside our own agendas and truly focusing on the other person's perspective.
And it's not just about being quiet.
Right.
It's about actively participating in the conversation, asking clarifying questions, and showing genuine interest in what the other person has to say.
And Carnegie gives some great tips for becoming a better listener. He talks about maintaining eye contact, nodding your head, using verbal cues like, I see, and tell me more, to encourage the speaker to continue.
He also emphasizes, asking questions instead of giving direct order.
Oh, that's a good one.
He believed that by involving people in the decision-making process, you could foster a sense of ownership and commitment, which is much more empowering than just telling people what to do.
He has that great example of Charles Schwab. Right? When he was faced with a production problem at one of his mills, he didn't yell at the manager.
Right.
Instead, he asked a series of questions that guided the manager to find the solution on his own.
It's such a brilliant leadership technique.
It is.
And it ties into this idea of, guiding people rather than controlling them.
Right.
Now, speaking of making people feel good, Carnegie also had some fascinating insights into the art of giving praise.
Yeah.
He was a big believer in encouragement.
Yeah.
But he also cautioned against empty flattery.
Right.
He believed that praise should be specific and sincere, focusing on genuine accomplishments and effort.
And he emphasized the importance of praising progress, not just perfection.
Right. That's so important.
It is.
It's about recognizing and celebrating those small wins along the way, which can be incredibly motivating.
Absolutely.
Especially for people who are struggling or lacking confidence.
Yeah.
It's about creating that positive feedback loop where people feel encouraged to keep trying and improving.
And Carnegie also provides strategies for handling those trickier situations.
Oh, like what?
Like when you need to correct someone's mistake or deliver bad news.
Right.
He recognized that direct criticism could be damaging to a person's ego.
Yeah.
And could lead to defensiveness and resentment.
So instead, he advocated for a more indirect approach.
Yeah.
He suggests starting by talking about your own mistakes first.
Oh, that's good.
Which helps, disarm the other person and make them more open to feedback.
It's all about building empathy and understanding.
He also advises addressing mistakes, indirectly, rather than pointing them out directly.
Oh, you do that.
For example, instead of saying, you messed up this report, you could say something like, I noticed a few inconsistencies in this report.
Right.
Can we go over them together?
Yeah.
It's subtle, but it can make a big difference.
It's about framing it as a collaborative effort.
Exactly.
Which is less likely to trigger a defensive reaction.
Yeah.
And Carnegie also stressed the importance of letting the other person save face, even when they're clearly in the wrong.
Right.
He believed that everyone needs to feel respected and valued.
Yeah.
And that publicly humiliating someone would only damage the relationship.
So he recommended finding ways to acknowledge their good intentions.
Yeah.
Even if their actions were misguided.
In that story, he tells about the subcontractor who delivered substandard materials.
Oh, well.
Instead of going off on the guy.
Yeah.
Carnegie took the time to learn about his business, complimenting him on his innovative techniques.
Right.
And showing empathy for the challenges he was facing.
And how did that go?
The subcontractor was so disarmed by this unexpected approach that he immediately agreed to replace the materials without any argument.
Wow, that's great.
It's a reminder that sometimes the best way to win someone over is to appeal to their better nature.
And that connects to another key principle that Carnegie highlights.
Okay.
Being sympathetic to the other person's ideas and desires. He believed that most people are motivated by a desire to feel important.
Right.
And that acknowledging their perspective creates a sense of connection and understanding.
He tells that story about negotiating with a hotel manager who was trying to raise his rent, exorbitantly.
Oh, wow.
And instead of arguing about the fairness of the increase, Carnegie focused on understanding the manager's perspective.
Yeah.
He even wrote down a list of pros and cons for the manager.
Wow.
Framing it in terms of the manager's own interests.
That's brilliant. It's like he's saying, Let's look at this from your point of view and see how we can both benefit.
Exactly. And the manager was so impressed by this thoughtful approach that he agreed to a much lower rent increase.
That's amazing.
It's a reminder that by putting ourselves in the other person's shoes and understanding their motivations, we can often find solutions that work for everyone.
Carnegie also talks about appealing to people's nobler motives.
Yeah.
He believed that everyone wants to see themselves as fair, honest, and generous. And that if you frame your requests in a way that aligns with these values, you're more likely to get a positive response.
So instead of saying, you need to do this because it's your job, you could say, I know you're someone who cares about doing the right thing. And I believe this is the best course of action.
It's about appealing to people's sense of integrity and purpose.
And finally, Carnegie was a big believer in the power of dramatizing your ideas.
Oh, yeah.
He believed that people are more likely to remember and be moved by stories and vivid examples than by dry facts and figures.
He encourages us to use storytelling to make our points more memorable and impactful.
He gives the example of a sales rep trying to convince a grocer to upgrade his, outdated cash registers.
Oh, wow.
And instead of just listing the features of the new registers, the sales rep took a stack of pennies.
Oh, wow.
And threw them on the counter saying, you're literally throwing away money with these old machines.
That's great.
The grocer was so startled by this visual that he immediately agreed to buy the new registers.
It's a great example of how a little bit of showmanship can go a long way in persuasion.
And Carnegie also talked about the power of, throwing down a challenge.
Yeah.
He believed that people are often motivated by a desire to prove their worth. And that by presenting them with a challenge, you can tap into that competitive spirit.
Absolutely.
And inspire them to achieve great things.
Like in the story of Charles Schwab and the struggling steel mill.
Yeah.
Instead of lecturing the workers about their low production, Schwab just wrote a big 6 on the factory floor.
Oh, wow.
Representing the tons of steel the day shift had produced.
And what happened?
The night shift, seeing that number, they felt challenged to outperform their colleagues and ended up producing 7 tons.
That's so cool. It's such a simple but effective technique.
It is.
It's about tapping into people's intrinsic motivation. And giving them something to strive for.
And Carnegie also stressed the importance of being genuinely interested in others. He believed that people can sense when you're being phony or manipulative. And that the only way to truly win friends and influence people is to approach them with sincerity and authenticity.
He tells a story about being at a dinner party and being seated next to a botanist.
Oh, yeah?
Now, I know nothing about botany, but I was genuinely curious about the botanist's work. So I asked him questions and listened attentively as he talked about his research. He was so happy that someone was interested that he spent the entire evening talking to me.
Wow.
Even though there were tons of other people there.
That's a great example of how genuine interest can create a powerful connection.
It's about being present in the moment and truly engaging with the other person, not trying to impress them or push your own agenda.
And that brings us to one of Carnegie's most enduring principles.
Okay.
The power of a smile. Smile. He believed that a smile is a universal language of friendliness and goodwill.
Okay.
It can instantly disarm people, put them at ease, create a positive first impression.
I like that.
He tells a story about a young nurse who was working in a hospital on Thanksgiving Day, feeling incredibly lonely and homesick.
Oh, no.
She was about to cry when a student nurse noticed her distress and approached her with a warm smile and a friendly greeting. That simple act of kindness completely changed the young nurse's day.
Wow.
Reminding her that even in the midst of sadness, there's always room for joy and connection.
It's a beautiful reminder of the power of human connection.
It is.
Carnegie believed that a smile is a gift we can give freely to anyone, and that it has the power to brighten even the darkest of days.
And before we move on, I want to touch on another important point that Carnegie makes.
Okay.
He talks about how important it is to remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
It's so true.
When someone remembers your name, it makes you feel seen and acknowledged.
Right.
It shows that they were paying attention and that they care enough to remember something important about you.
Yeah.
We talked about Jim Farley earlier, who was a master of remembering names.
Oh, right.
He believed this was key to his success in politics, as it made people feel important.
Yeah.
He'd send personalized letters addressing people by their first names, and it made a huge impact.
Yeah.
People felt like he genuinely cared about them, and in turn, they were more receptive to his message.
It's a great reminder that even small gestures of acknowledgement can go a long way in building strong relationships.
Now, shifting gears a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about another fascinating part of Carnegie's book.
Hmm.
His insights on leadership.
Okay.
He had a lot to say about how to effectively lead and motivate others. He believed that true leadership is not about bossing people around, but about inspiring them to achieve their best.
Yeah.
One of the key principles he highlighted was the importance of admitting your mistakes, quickly and emphatically. He believed that trying to cover up or make excuses for your mistakes would only erode trust and damage your credibility.
Yeah, he even shares a story about a time when he made a mistake during a radio broadcast.
Really? What happened?
He got a fact wrong about Louisa May Alcott,
Oh, no.
the author of Little Women. He said she lived in Concord, New Hampshire, when she actually lived in Concord, Massachusetts.
Oh, wow. I can imagine some listeners were not happy about that.
Yeah, he got this angry letter from a listener who was really upset about the error, but instead of trying to defend himself, Carnegie immediately wrote back, apologized, admitted he was wrong.
What did the listener say?
The listener was so impressed by Carnegie's honesty and humility that she wrote back forgiving him and even apologized for getting so angry.
Wow.
It's a great example of how taking ownership of our mistakes can strengthen relationships.
That's a really good point.
And build trust.
It shows that vulnerability can actually make us more relatable and trustworthy. Now, beyond admitting mistakes, Carnegie also talks about how important it is to give people a sense of ownership in their work.
Right. He believed that people are more motivated when they feel like they have a stake in the outcome, and that giving them more autonomy and responsibility can unleash their creativity and potential.
He tells that story about working with a team of engineers who were designing a new product instead of micromanaging them and telling them exactly what to do.
Right.
Carnegie gave them the freedom to brainstorm and come up with their own solutions.
And what happened? Did they come up with anything good?
The result was a product that was far more innovative and successful than anything Carnegie could have imagined on his own.
That's a great example of how empowering people can lead to amazing results.
It is.
It's like he's saying, trust your team, give them the space to be creative, and watch them soar.
It's a powerful leadership lesson. And finally, Carnegie emphasized the importance of getting your team excited and passionate about their work. He believed that enthusiasm is contagious.
Oh, for sure.
And that a leader who genuinely loves what they do can inspire that same passion in others.
He has that story about working with a group of salespeople who were struggling to meet their quotas.
Oh, right.
And instead of scolding them for their low numbers, Carnegie took them out for a night of fun and camaraderie.
So instead of focusing on the negative, he focused on building relationships.
Exactly.
And boosting morale.
He shared stories and jokes with them.
Yeah.
And reminded them why their work was important.
And I bet I know what happened next.
You got it. The next day, the salespeople came back to work energized and ready to go.
Yeah.
And their sales numbers went through the roof.
It shows how a little bit of fun and inspiration can make a huge difference in motivating people.
It's a great reminder that sometimes the best way to lead is to create a positive and supportive environment where people feel valued and appreciated.
Absolutely.
Now, before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive into how to win friends and influence people, I want to touch on one last thing that really stood out to me.
Yeah?
Carnegie's emphasis on sincerity.
Oh, for sure.
He repeatedly reminds us that these principles aren't about manipulating or tricking people.
Right.
It's about building genuine connections based on respect and empathy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about using our understanding of human nature to create more positive and fulfilling relationships.
So as we reflect on all the wisdom in how to win friends and influence people, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why this book has remained so relevant for so many years.
I think it's because Carnegie taps into something universal, the desire to connect with others on a deeper level and build meaningful relationships. His principles provide a timeless framework for doing just that.
He doesn't just lecture us.
Right.
He tells stories and anecdotes that make his points relatable and memorable. He writes in a clear, concise style that's easy to understand and put into practice.
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, his emphasis on sincerity is key.
Yeah.
These principles are about building genuine connections, not about using tricks or shortcuts.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Exploring the principles that have helped millions build stronger relationships and achieve greater success. But here's something to think about. Is there a relationship in your life, whether it's at work, with family, or even with yourself, where you could benefit from applying one of these principles?
Maybe it's remembering to express appreciation more often, truly listening to someone's perspective, or finding ways to encourage and inspire those around you.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're using these principles in your own life. You can share your reflections on our website or social media.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep connecting.
He believed that trying to cover up or make excuses for your mistakes would only erode trust and damage your credibility.
Makes sense.
So he really encouraged owning up to those mistakes. Now, beyond admitting mistakes, Carnegie also talks about how important it is to give people a sense of ownership in their work. He believed that people are more motivated when they feel like they have a stake in the outcome. And that giving them more autonomy and responsibility can unleash their creativity and potential.
He tells that story about working with a team of engineers who were designing a new product. Instead of micromanaging them and telling them exactly what to do, Carnegie gave them the freedom to brainstorm and come up with their own solutions.
Interesting. And what happened? Did they come up with anything good?
The result was a product that was far more innovative and successful than anything Carnegie could have imagined on his own.
That's amazing.
It is.
It's a great example of how empowering people can lead to amazing results.
It is.
It's like he's saying, trust your team, give them the space to be creative, and watch them soar.
It's a powerful leadership lesson. And finally, Carnegie emphasized the importance of getting your team excited and passionate about their work.
Oh, for sure.
He believed that enthusiasm is contagious. And that a leader who genuinely loves what they do can inspire that same passion in others.
He has that story about working with a group of salespeople who are struggling to meet their quotas. And instead of scolding them for their low numbers, Carnegie took them out for a night of fun and camaraderie.
So instead of focusing on the negative, he focused on building relationships and boosting morale.
Exactly. He shared stories and jokes with them and reminded them why their work was important.
And I bet I know what happened next.
You got it. The next day, the salespeople came back to work energized and ready to go, and their sales numbers went through the roof.
It shows how a little bit of fun and inspiration can make a huge difference in motivating people.
It's a great reminder that sometimes the best way to lead is to create a positive and supportive environment where people feel valued and appreciated.
Absolutely.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on one last thing that really stood out to me in this deep dive.
Okay.
Carnegie's emphasis on sincerity.
Oh, for sure.
He repeatedly reminds us that these principles aren't about manipulating or tricking people. It's about building genuine connections based on respect and empathy.
Absolutely. It's about using our understanding of human nature to create more positive and fulfilling relationships.
So as we reflect on all the wisdom in how to win friends and influence people, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why this book has remained so relevant for so many years.
I think it's because Carnegie taps into something universal. The desire to connect with others on a deeper level and build meaningful relationships. His principles provide a timeless framework for doing just that.
He doesn't just lecture us. He tells stories and anecdotes that make his points relatable and memorable. He writes in a clear, concise style that's easy to understand and put into practice.
Yeah, and as we talked about earlier, his emphasis on sincerity is key. These principles are about building genuine connections, not about using tricks or shortcuts.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, exploring the principles that have helped millions build stronger relationships and achieve greater success. But here's something to think about. Is there a relationship in your life, whether it's at work, with family, or even with yourself, where you could benefit from applying one of these principles?
Maybe it's remembering to express appreciation more often, truly listening to someone's perspective, or finding ways to encourage and inspire those around you.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're using these principles in your own life. You can share your reflections on our website or social media.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep connecting.
You know, it's incredible how much practical wisdom is just packed into this book.
It really is.
And what's really cool is that, it's not just about winning friends or influencing people in some superficial way. It's about building meaningful connections. And understanding human nature on a deeper level.
You're absolutely right. One of the things that struck me most in our deep dive was Carnegie's emphasis on sincerity.
Yeah.
It's not about manipulation or using tricks to get people to do what you want.
Right.
It's about approaching every interaction with authenticity and a genuine desire to understand the other person.
I think that's a big part of why this book has resonated with so many people for so long.
Yeah.
It's not just a collection of, clever tactics.
Yeah.
It's a philosophy of human interaction.
Yeah.
Based on respect, empathy, and genuine connection.
And the principles themselves are so timeless.
Right.
Whether you're dealing with colleagues, family members, or even strangers.
Yeah.
These principles can help you navigate those interactions with more grace, understanding, and effectiveness.
It's like he's giving us a roadmap.
Yeah.
For building stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
Yeah.
In every aspect of our life.
I think that's a great way to put it. A roadmap for better human connection.
Yeah.
And the best part is that it's never too late to start using these principles.
That's so true. No matter where you are in your life, you can always benefit from learning how to connect with others more effectively.
Yeah.
How to express appreciation sincerely, and how to inspire and motivate those around you.
And who knows, maybe in doing so, you'll even inspire yourself to grow and become the best version of you.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into how to win friends and influence people, we want to leave you with one final thought. We've explored a lot of powerful principles.
We have.
But ultimately, it's up to you to decide how you'll use them.
So what resonated most with you?
What are some small changes you can make in your own life to start putting these principles into practice?
Maybe it's making a conscious effort to remember people's names, expressing your appreciation more often, or simply taking the time to truly listen to those around you.
Remember, even small actions can have a ripple effect, creating positive change in your relationships and in the world around you.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep connecting, and keep inspiring.